Okay, so maybe the thumbnail is a bit of an exaggeration, but there's no denying family connections play a huge role in Star Wars. Not just in the personal stories that motivate the franchise, like the key role the relationship between Luke and Anakin plays in the original trilogy, but in how everyone important tends to be related to someone else, or how many minor characters get mentioned in a source book as having actually been like the 30th generation of that person's family to hold that job. So today, thanks to a Discord suggestion, we're going to look at some of the family names which pop up multiple times in Star Wars history. The Skywalkers are one of the big names you may recognize, with Anakin and Padme's descendants playing a major role in basically every faction or organization for the next 200 years. They're only one of the families we're talking about today, and the one with which I'm pretty sure you're most familiar with, so I'll try not to go too in-depth with any of them and stick to a general overview of the family and the different positions each member holds. Leia eventually becomes Chief of State of the New Republic, with Luke starting the New Jedi Order. Leia and her daughter Jaina each go on to serve on the Jedi Council alongside Luke, while Jaina's twin, Jacen, becomes a Sith Lord and Chief of State of the Galactic Alliance in that order. Jedi leadership may not technically be an inherited position, much like Chief of State isn't supposed to be, but while we don't know if Luke and his wife Mara Jade's son Ben ends up in charge of the Order, it is eventually run by another Skywalker, Cole, who leads it at the time of Darth Krayt's Jedi Purge. Jaina Solo marries former Imperial Chief of State Jagged Fell, who, aside from being Wedge Antilles' nephew, then goes on to become Emperor, passing the title down through their children to Rowan Fell. Through Jacen Solo's daughter with Hapan Queen Mother Tenel Ka, Alana, the Hapans are also ruled by a Skywalker descendant, so it's really hard to find a part of the galaxy not led in some way by a Skywalker. Han's cousin, Thraken Sal Solo, also ended up leading multiple Corellian revolts, including during the devastating Second Galactic Civil War, where an entire new confederation breaks off of the Galactic Alliance, and where Jacen was also one of the leaders of the Galactic Alliance, on top of Thraken leading the collaborationist Peace Brigade during the Yuuzhan Vong War. So really, it wouldn't be too far off between the rebellion and the end of the Legends timeline to paint most galactic conflicts as one big family drama. And this isn't the first time a kind of Jedi dynasty exists in the galaxy. One of the biggest, at least, were the Sunriders, who you should not confuse with the Skywalkers, many generations of whom were Jedi. This began with Jev Sunrider and his grandson Ander Sunrider, who married Nomi Sunrider, a major player in the wars against the Sith Lords Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma. Ander with a U, died shortly after their marriage, but the pair had a child named Vima Sunrider, another Jedi who was going to be in Knights of the Old Republic instead of Bastila Shan, if not for a trademark issue on the Sunrider name. Vima's descendants included Vima de Boda, another Jedi we see as a survivor of the Jedi Purge living on Nar Shaddaa in the Dark Empire comics. But speaking of Bastila, the Shan last name is another one we hear a few times. Bastila leaves the Jedi Order following her marriage to Revan, but a few generations later, one of their descendants, Satil Shan, became the Grand Master of the Order in the Old Republic MMO. And this was actually an order that would have been rebuilt following the events of Knights of the Old Republic 2. We do know that all of Revan and Bastila's descendants didn't share such prominent positions in this rebuilt order, though, as several members of the family, including their only known son Vaynor and Satil's son Theron, were not Force-sensitive at all, meaning they didn't sense the need to like this video and subscribe for more. Moving away from the Jedi about as far as you possibly can, we'll take a look at the Mandalorians. Jango Fett and his millions of clones, including Boba, are probably one of the biggest families one generation removed from each other, even including most insectoid species. But going back a few generations to the Mandalorian Crusades just before Knights of the Old Republic, one of their ancestors, Cassius Fett, was second in command of the Mandalorian forces overall, just after Mandalore the Ultimate himself. The Fett clan as a whole remained fairly influential even despite the massive defeat faced by the Mandalorians in these crusades, with other members like Como and Vorton continuing to lead Mandalorian forces in other conflicts with the Sith, Republic, and Eternal Empire. In the political realm, aside from the Solos and Skywalkers ending up in positions of significant power all the time, a few other families do stand out as well. First are the Valorums, 4 of whom served as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic in its final 1,000 years. Tarsis Valorum oversaw the Ruusan Reformation 1,000 years before the Empire, following the victory of the Republic over the Sith in the New Sith Wars at the Battle of Ruusan, becoming the first non-Jedi to hold the position in centuries. Then there was Ixes Valorum and another unnamed Valorum, about both of whom very little is known. But finally there was the much more famous Finis Valorum, Supreme Chancellor in the Phantom Menace. But even the Valorums who didn't reach the position of Supreme Chancellor had some major pull in the Republic, partially through the highly successful Valorum Shipping Company. A later Chief of State of the New Republic also had a pretty influential family, Borsk Phalia. He gained prominence as a leading figure of the Bothans when they and their spy network joined the rebels, going on to become a member of the Provisional Council leading the early New Republic. But he was also a relative of two of the most famous Bothan admirals of the period. First was Laren Crefay, who hoped to lead the liberation of Coruscant before mistakes in the Battle of Borlaus, which the New Republic hoped to use as a staging ground to attack Coruscant, resulted in his own death. Later, Laren's grandson and Borsk's cousin, Trace Crefay, became one of the most prominent members of the New Republic military by the time of the Yuzan Vong War, going on from his position as admiral to serve as supreme commander, replacing the Celestian supreme commander Sian Sov, who had himself replaced Akbar. Trace only held this position briefly as the Bothan declaration of Ar-Cry, or total war against the Yuzan Vong, a declaration which meant the Bothans were bound to drive the Yuzan Vong into extinction, put him at odds with his responsibilities as supreme commander once the war ended. There are also a plethora of ancient human military families in Star Wars. These are usually situations where a character from the movies will get fleshed out by background lore into having been one of the most ancient and well-established military families in galactic history on one hand, or they'll just have a few relatives thrown in on the other. Most of the Imperial characters in the original trilogy do get this treatment. Admiral Ozzel's family comes from the planet Axum, one of the planets which contributed most to the Republic's military upon its founding 25,000 years before the Empire, where Ozzel's family, along with the Bangiers, Wyrmises, and Holts, are all established as being early power players. Mulchive Wyrmis was the captain of the Devastator, Darth Vader's ISD, with Osted Wyrmis being the Imperial Admiral last responsible for defending Axum's system, which also included the planet Anaxes. The Bangier family included Lon Bangier, another Imperial Admiral. But while we do know Bangier's family was important on early Axum, we don't know any of the other members' names. Captain Nita, whom Vader kills in Episode 5, was a member of yet another family who apparently often served in the military. Nita's failures at Hoth apparently caused significant issues for the entire Nita family. We see his cousin in Wedge's Gamble having been relegated to serving aboard a climate-controlling mirror station over Coruscant, but he also notes that essentially the rest of the Nita family had entirely vanished. The fact that his whole family was purged implies, to me at least, that they probably weren't one of these ancient established families and instead were more likely just a family that all got involved in the military at different levels. Other influential families did play significant roles in other areas of imperial leadership as well, like Cassio Tagge, whose family, the House of Tagge or Tag or Taj, have roots that go back to their origins as nobles on the planet Tapasi, yet another of the Republic's founding core worlds. Cassio and at least one of his brothers, Ulrich, became fairly high-ranking Imperial officers. Grand Moff Tarkin was also developed into being the cousin of Ranulph Tarkin, one of the leading figures in pushing for the Republic to develop its own military before the Clone Wars. Realistically, there's probably more characters, especially in the Imperial military, who get expanded into having other members of their family be in the Imperial military than not. Even Warlord Zinj has his own family expanded on when his mother, Marissa Zinj, was made into an admiral in the Republic's Outland Region Security Force, who then went on to serve in the Clone Wars before stealing her Venator and becoming a pirate after misogyny in the Empire starting pushing her out of command roles, leading to her son, Warlord Zinj, which I actually assume is his legal first name, hunting down and killing his own mother. There's ultimately three main things behind this kind of family prominence. For one, there's definitely instances of entrenched power and oligarchy going on, particularly with families like the House of Tagge and the Ozzels. And yeah, that does extend to the Skywalkers as well, especially given how often their individual power turns out to be kind of a bad thing. I don't know that it's a given that the Skywalkers should just be handed all the political power as well, but that gets at a topic for a different video. Secondly, in many of the cases, seemingly including the Nitas, it's also just a sign of the fact that the galaxy was hugely militarized across two massive wars, the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War, which did see much of the galaxy end up in some kind of military service, which can be one explanation for why we see so many of the same last names in military service, beyond just the idea that each person in the military was part of this millennia-long tradition of military service. The third factor is that Star Wars authors simply cannot help themselves, and everyone's got to be related to someone. For major characters, while there's still some massive in-universe political implications from having a small group of families end up in every important position, it does kind of just come down to the soap opera elements, where authors want to keep talking about characters we know and their families, so as the stakes get raised, they all keep ending up in these positions of power, or at least most of them do. Either way, that's going to do it for our look at some of the most important families in the Star Wars galaxy. There's an almost unending amount of families playing major roles in Star Wars, especially when you throw things like the Hutts in there, so this could easily get a part 2 if you're interested. Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.